From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's ahead. K-State's Glynn Tonsor on the cattle markets. Glynn will discuss the impact that full packing capacity is having on the market, and he'll look at the encouraging signs in the latest beef demand numbers. Following then, K-State's Jaymelynn Farney. She'll report on the information she's collected on warm season annual forage productivity, evaluating 17 different forage types and combinations, comparing those in two ways, biomass produced and cost of production. This information can be helpful to you producers who intend on planting summer annual forage for haying, grazing, or for silage. And later, Jeff Wickman will be in with this week's Forage segment for you. All that here on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Thanks for tuning in. This is Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. To the cattle markets we go first, and across the way once again is livestock economist Glynn Tonsor of K-State Research and Extension. Glynn, the markets last week, again, the fed cattle trade on the cash side, fairly even, but it did manage to gain a slight bit of ground.
Yeah, cash was up maybe $1 on the week, about $120 per hundredweights, what they were called for the week is what AMS put out there. That's slightly different than the board. So the June live cattle contract is about 115, is down 50 cents for the week. You look over to feeder cattle, there's actually even more movement, and that's reflecting the corn market, if nothing else. So corn took a big fall off. Our listeners probably say it was due for that because we've been having corn prices go up for quite a while. But corn did fall, weather developments and so forth this past week. That was supportive of feeder cattle. So AMS called the feeder cattle complex up here in Kansas $2 to $4, maybe $5 higher on the week. 650-pound steers. I wrote down one lot, 53 head, weighing 640, went for 147. Heaviers at 950 were up $4-6. A specific lot was 349 head, weighing 925, came in at 131. And that was similar if you look over at the board. So the May feeder cattle contract closed about 137.5, up a full $6 for the week. And again, there's several things at play there, but probably most importantly was we had almost $1 decline on the July corn contract. Cash corn didn't pull down quite that much, but we definitely have a sign that corn might be getting a little bit cheaper. Our listeners that feed corn are certainly looking forward to more of that.
All right. To the beef cutout, though, the boxed beef prices this past week, still very much on the incline.
Yeah, so Choice closed Friday at $317. That's up about $11 from the prior Friday. Select was at $293 on Friday, up $3 from the prior Friday. For some quick context, yes, it's up, as I just told you, not quite at the peak we've had, and we're still down from, I noted, basically a year ago, we were in the middle of the COVID bottleneck. Mm-hmm. The peak on the Choice cutout hit $475 on May 12th. The peak on the Select cutout hit $453 on May 11th. So we have a long ways to go from hitting those peaks. I'm not sitting here forecasting that. I don't think we will hit that peak. It's not the reason I highlight it. It's just to give us context is cutout prices are certainly up. I think they're up for multiple reasons. We're refilling the food service channel. Export demand signals are pretty strong, and retail demand is kind of held on. Those are all bullish on that front. That, of course, brings up the question, how do we continue to have strong cutout but not as strong fed cattle prices? Mm-hmm. And we could probably talk for hours on that, and lots of chatter in the industry is around that front. But it boils down to the current status of infrastructure. So our ability, the number of animals we can process in a normal 40-hour window, plus second shifts, plus Saturdays, and how it aligns with the number of cattle trying to get in that system. This isn't anything new. Folks like me have been saying this for months now, is the industry's pretty flush with cattle relative to the ability to process them. I'll highlight one of my colleagues, Dr. Coots, who for our listeners know is at Colorado State University. He is one of, I believe there's now 5 authors that are on rotating schedule for the In the Cattle Markets newsletter series. It's a weekly newsletter. Our listeners here, they hear from Caitlin and others from LMIC who might be familiar with that. But he's recently been writing on this. I've been writing on it. Dr. Peel, Oklahoma State's been writing on it. The punchline again is the historic relationships between wholesale beef prices and fed cattle prices don't work the same when you're at, in econ jargon, kind of a kink point when the system's full, right? If it's not full, those relationships work. We can buy more cattle in, we can push more cattle out. And on the other side, the market responds more to cutout prices. We don't have that same typical historic relationship when you're at, I call it a kink or a pinch point, where the system is full of cattle. Yes, gross margins for running these plants is quite high. I'm not disputing that. We still don't know what net margins are because we don't have good insights on the cost. But regardless, if you don't have the physical ability to kill more cattle, that changes the economics of what you're going to pay for fed cattle. That's not a welcome message for a lot of our listeners, and I recognize that. It's not my job to be popular. It's my job to do the best I can to analyze the situation, and I think it's important to remember that.
The question then persists. When will that kink be straightened out? Any hint as to when we'll see more of a flow, if you will, as opposed to this backlog?
Yeah, so there's I'll call it a near-term adjustment to that and longer term. The near term is largely changes in cattle numbers. We're not going to change the ability to process cattle a lot in the near future. And by the time we get to the end of 2021, I think we're going to be in a better situation. But if you're listening to me, we have months ahead, not days ahead, on having a lot of cattle trying to go through the system. So we're not out of the woods on that. The longer-term part, and I've talked about this in other longer presentations, is how much additional capacity to process cattle is going to be added. Where is it? Who owns it? What are the size of those plants? Those are all unknowns. Cattle Facts actually put out, they think it might be 2023 before we're roughly at what they call 100%. So equilibrium, if you like, between the number of animals we could process in a typical 40-hour window during the week, Monday to Friday, relative to fed cattle supplies. So there's a near-term adjustment at the end of 2021. I think things will get better on this. Give me a couple more years to that point, then we may have some additional plants or second shifts at existing plants and the like that will also help. But we're going to keep talking about it for the foreseeable future.
And just to round out this story, the processing status numbers for this past week.
Yep. The initial estimates through Saturday were 640,000. That's total cattle slaughtered, right on par with 638 the week before, up notably from 519 the prior year. Real quick, I will note, if you look at just through since 2010, the last 10, 11 years of history here, the most we ever processed was 690,000. That was in June of 2011. So we are below that, and that reflects labor challenges and the ongoing COVID-oriented adjustments that have been there. But we're still running the system pretty hard, and there's been some plants that have left the industry since 2010 as well. So the industry is pressing hard, and that's important to remember. Just the physical ability to kill cattle is constrained.
Well, how this might all speak to the feedlot cattle return outlook, and if you look at the chart today, basically you're seeing net returns hover around break even either side.
Yes. Every month I update our feedlot returns. They were done on May 11th. And at that time, we had elevated cost of gain compared to the month before. So if you pull up the latest feedlot returns on our Ag Manager website compared to the month before, you're going to see the projected cost of gains for cattle that are going to come out of yards the rest of 2021 were elevated. Specifically, if you pick out cattle coming out August, September, October, we're talking about projected cost of gains in the 115 range. So right on par with cash fed cattle prices today. They're just, they're crowding into that. That's part of the reason that there's profitability concerns, of course. So they are small gains, small losses out through most of 2021. The worst month when I look at this series, I look out to November, is a loss of $70. Underneath that is a cost of gain that's $113 and a projected sales price of $130, where you paid for $150 for the feeder coming in. What you paid for the animal coming in is pretty much set in that exercise, but exactly what you get for the animal going out and certainly the cost of gain are both moving parts in that story. That's the worst month. Most of the other months in this exercise are smaller losses or small positive gains.
You can keep track of that information, of course, at agmanager.info. Rounding it out on the demand side, the latest USDA numbers, these take us, you say, through March?
Yes, so the USDA data, as we've noted before, is lagged a little bit. So March compared to March of 2020, in many ways it's the last pre-COVID comparisons we can make here. Domestic meat demand, beef, pork, and chicken is stronger in 2021 than it was March of 2020. Export demand is stronger for both beef, pork, and chicken than it was March of 20. Those are both very good things. When you round it out and look at April information, we can get that from our meat demand monitor. So it's a different source. That's the checkoff, beef and pork checkoff survey-based effort. There I want to highlight the food service demand in April that we're monitoring was quite strong. So demand was up compared to the prior month. 6 of the 8 evaluated products, including beef hamburger, pork chop, baby rib meals, the like, are all up compared to the prior month. Why am I introducing that here? One of the reasons cutout prices are higher is the food service sector. There's more foot traffic optimism about food traffic, and that food service meat demand measure being up is very consistent with that. It will be worth watching the next few months. We still have more and more people being vaccinated, more and more people getting more comfortable being out and about. We also have at-home grilling starting to take off, so maybe on the retail side we're going to have that going. There's a lot of reasons for optimism on the demand front. My one word of caution would be there's a lot of commentary about inflation, so exactly what that's going to eat into consumer spending power, and will that ease some meat demand support? We're going to be talking about that, I think, in the months ahead. But overall, optimism, more foot traffic, and at the moment, a lot of cash in the average consumer's pockets, all round that out is good for meat demand.
And one parting thought here. Some entities, we'll put it that way, have been pushing this concept of meatless Mondays, drawing a lot of publicity, it seems, but do these campaigns have an impact?
Yeah, so the Meat Demand Monitor has space for what I call ad hoc questions, so some topical things are added each month. And in April, we did a question that basically asked, how familiar are you? Do you participate? I'll give you those numbers. 57% in April, this is a national survey for our listeners here, say they've never even heard of Meatless Monday. 29% say they've heard of it, but they choose not to, or they don't consciously participate. For those listening, that leaves 14%. So 6% say they regularly participate, and 8% say they participate infrequently or sometimes. On balance, that suggests to me that the minority are participating. The majority haven't, they say they haven't even heard of it. So there's a lot of media chatter, but maybe not on-the-ground activity that matches it at the moment. To reaffirm that a little bit, and actually the reason I asked this question was in 2014, my friend and colleague Jason Lusk, our listeners are familiar with, he used to run a parallel effort while he was at Oklahoma State. He asked a very similar question, and the findings here were very similar. In particular, the majority were not familiar with Meatless Mondays, and the small minority regularly participate. I think it's useful just to monitor that because there certainly is a lot of media chatter, and there has been in the recent weeks.
Reassuring to hear that. Glynn, as always, thanks for coming over. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
Those thoughts on the cattle market factors, Glynn Tonsor, livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension with us to open up this Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today continues now as we tap into fresh new research out of K-State's Southeast Research and Extension Center, and it may well have application for other parts of Kansas as well. Our guest and her research associates looked at warm season annual forage production for livestock and evaluating that forage for the biomass produced and then matching up to that the cost of producing those various forages. Jaymelynn Farney has joined us, beef systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension, among those involved in this research. I wanted to let you describe it further, the intent of this project. There are lots of parts to it. We're going to unpack it here, but summarize what you are getting at with this effort.
Yes, Eric, I would be happy to. And those of you listening, just let you know there is a lot of points to this. So if you, after you listen to us talk, please read the publication and take some time to process it. Right. But what had me really interested in this concept was visiting with producers around the state who use cover crops, but those who also just use annual forages. And our warm season annual forages, your sorghum sedans, your millets, very popular for cattle feed. And I've been very interested in looking at, do the single species, just planting one variety of that grass species, for example, or if you put that grass species with a legume, can we improve the quality, the quantity of forage produced, as well as maybe have some of those beneficial soil health properties? Just trying to put all of it together to improve our overall sustainable agricultural systems.
This study was conducted last year. You looked at 17 different warm season forages, Jaymelynn?
I did. And, of those 17 forages, we had 5 that will use the terminology monoculture. That just means we planted one category of plant species. So by categories, I mean grass. So our grasses were a BMR, brown midrib sorghum sudan, a pearl millet. I had 2 varieties of legumes, cowpeas and sun hemp, and 1 broadleaf. Looked at some black oil sunflowers is what we ended up using in this study. We then blended those into 2 or 3 category blends. And when I say categories, we have 1 grass with a legume or 1 grass with a broadleaf. So specific example would be sorghum sudan with sunflower, and then a sorghum sudan with cowpea. And we looked at those different combinations. Plus my 17th one was looking at pearl millet at a high seeding rate or a low seeding rate. Because when you look at our recommendations, it's a huge range for seeding recommendations for pearl millet. So I was just interested in its quality and quantity, whether we went with the low or a high seeding rate.
And as far as utilizing these forages, you looked at 3 specific treatments as well as the cover crop value?
I did. There's been long-term data that we have off of hay production of some of these single species, or long-term data of the silage production on some of these grasses. But of these blends, there's been very little information looking at their biomass production. But looking at those, whether we utilized it as a grazable forage, which, a lot of times we forget about. These warm season annuals have great grazing potential if you practice some additional management strategies. And Eric's had me on the radio talking about these, about some prussic acid management, let it get 2 foot tall, only graze it, leave about 8 inches of residue out there so you get some regrowth and do rotational grazing. And as such, we clipped or did a simulated grazing of our sorghum sedans with those in mind. So that was our grazing treatment. And then we had a haying treatment that occurred. I wouldn't say it was at bloom. It was just a little bit following bloom. We had a little bit of heading starting to occur on some of our grass species. And we used our grass species as our predominant indicator of when we should be harvesting. And then we also harvested as a silage. We looked at all of those biomass components, and then we threw in the economics as well, looking at what are some viable options for a livestock feed.
So you coupled the costs of production, got those from several appropriate sources, to this biomass productivity to come up with findings that would serve hopefully as guidance in utilizing these warm season annual forages. So right to those, the dry matter produced, the biomass produced, did you have some forages standing out over the others, Jaymelynn?
We did, and as you would anticipate, the cover crop, the one that we did not harvest and until we took our sample right before termination, resulted in the most biomass production. Our next highest biomass production was our hay production, which averaged across all treatments about 3,800 pounds of dry matter per acre. Our grazing was our next highest biomass production with about 3,000 pounds of dry matter per acre, and our silage had our lowest biomass yield at about 2,600 pounds of dry matter per acre. Now, those numbers are still very impressive. However, in the summer of 2020 in southeast Kansas, and this is where this can be applicable across the state, we were in severe drought in southeast Kansas in essentially June through October. And we still got close to 2 pounds of dry matter. And if you converted that to actual hay bales coming off of your field, we got close to 2 tons of production.
Not bad at all across the board. Then you looked at the various forage types, and you looked at the monocultures versus the blends. But you have a ton of data here. What jumped out to you there, Jaymelynn?
The thing that first jumped out is we'll talk about some of our comparisons just in our monocultures first, because that was a pretty clear and easy thing to see. Our sunflowers resulted in the lowest biomass production. And that partially could be the variety of black oil sunflower seeds we used was a dwarf variety, which is supposed to have higher quality measures, higher crude protein and energy. But it also, because it's shorter, did not have near as much biomass production. But interestingly enough, and, it kind of follows other trends, sorghum Sudan out-yielded pearl millet in every category we looked at. Our legume production was about equal. Our sun hemp and our cowpeas had very similar production on average. However, it was interesting to see that in our hay harvesting, the sun hemp did result in more production in our second cutting as compared to our first. And I say that was interesting because when I'm actually out there clipping the plants and looking at them, you did see a greater amount of branching and regrowth that occurred with that sun hemp plant as compared to the cowpea, which when you talk to people who've grazed it, they say the same thing. The cattle come through and strip the leaves off, and then they develop new branches, and it just continually keeps going and going with this nasty stalk in the middle. But those were some of those in regards to our single species. Interestingly enough, when we added a second plant category to our grass species, we really did not impact biomass production. We didn't increase it, but we also didn't reduce it. And in some of my other summer projects, we would reduce it, but I think we might have found a better complementary plant species to our grasses this time. But it was still interesting to see because I've had a lot of producers who said that they thought that legume growing with their grasses resulted in more biomass production. We didn't see that, and I don't have my quality data yet, but I would anticipate we would see higher crude protein, which is a added value back into your production system. But we really didn't identify huge variations between single, 2 species, or 3 species. Now, we did notice that, of course, when we added a grass into our sunflower, we increased our sunflower biomass production. But other than that, nothing real earth-shattering.
Well, that sums up the biomass productivity side of this field trial, Jaymelynn, again conducted last year. But there's this other factor, as was mentioned earlier, that you incorporated into all of this, the costs of producing these warm season annual forages, either as a monoculture or as a blend. So now to that cost of production, and did you find differences of note there among the 17 forage options you studied?
We did, and that was probably the coolest take home of the whole thing is the cost of production. Because even though when we just talked pure biomass production, seed cost, fertilizer, harvesting, everything, when you talk about the grazing component, regardless of whether you were going to graze with a growing stalker animal, stalker steer or your growing replacement heifers, or if you had cow-calf pairs, which I calculated for both of those categories, the most expensive grazing feed that you could plant is a monoculture of cowpea or the combination of pearl millet plus cowpea. Those ones were your most expensive. From an intermediate cost range, we had the monocultures of sunflower and sun hemp, as well as the high rate of pearl millet. And the multi-species blend, when you mix together sorghum Sudan, sunflower, and cowpea, they were kind of intermediate. All the rest had similar lower cost values than those that I'd mentioned. Now, what was that cost of grazing range? And there was a huge range. And I calculated on the cost per grazing day. And, there's some differences in grazing days when you calculate it on your biomass potential. But it was anywhere from 51 cents up to $1.81 for your stocker or growing calves. And for your cow-calf pairs, 97 cents up to nearly $3.50 a head a day.
That's quite some latitude, isn't it?
It is. And, and once again, this was just an exercise that I did with 2020 values. So before you are looking to choose what plant species you want, use your own cost estimates for your operation to determine what your cost will be. But there is some huge differences. When you look at these annual forages to be put up as hay, once again, we still saw the same results on the grazing, that the monoculture of cowpea and the blend of pearl millet plus cowpea was the most expensive, but also our monoculture of sunflowers was right there with that same expensive price tag, per unit of actual hay coming out of the field. That's what we had calculated that on, not on a dry matter basis, actual hay bales coming out. Our lowest cost per ton of hay produced was for our monocultures of sorghum Sudan, as well as sun hemp, and the blends of sorghum Sudan plus sunflower or sun hemp, either one of those, the low seeding rate of pearl millet, as well as the sorghum Sudan plus sunflower plus sun hemp. And those of you listening while you're driving down the road, you're not going to get all that wrote down. So please go and look at the pub to see that list of which ones we had calculated as the lower cost.
We will tell them how to get to that.
But another little summary off of that big list. In general, if you had a base of a grass of sorghum Sudan, whether you mixed anything else in with it, you resulted in a pretty low cost per ton of hay produced. And that cost per ton of hay ranged anywhere from about $28.25 up to nearly $36 a ton of hay.
Then squeezing in here your findings on the silage side of this study. Did you see, again, differences in the costs associated with those?
We did see a few more fall in that more expensive range when you were looking at it for silage. It's a very high cost for our monocultures of sunflower and cowpea, just like before, but also our two species blends that included pearl millet, whether it was cowpea or sun hemp, both of them resulted in about the same high cost per ton of silage produced. And our lowest cost, and our silage was very interesting because there was very distinctly high cost and very distinct low cost, and then some in the middle. And so our very distinct low cost per ton of silage came from our monoculture of sorghum Sudan, the sorghum Sudan plus sun hemp, and our low seeding rate of pearl millet. And our cost per ton of silage produced ranged anywhere from about $22.75 up to nearly $41 per ton.
All of this is really good data, but folks, like you said, Jaymelynn, are drinking from a fire hose as they hear us talk about it today. The take-home in general is that there are differences here, and there are differences that producers need to be attuned to as they decide on a selection of a warm season annual forage for planting, even in these next few weeks, weather permitting.
Yes, and it's not too late to be thinking about it. Traditionally, when you utilize a tool like our Midwest Cover Crop Council decision tool that has a great, reliable planting window, you'd be thinking, man, we're a little late to get our sorghum Sudans in for, the southern half of the state. Well, it's been cold enough. You can hold off a bit and plant them a little later. But it's daunting, the amount of options that you can have out there.
Well, again, what you'd like producers to do at this juncture is check out the write-up on this work. It gets into the finer details. And how can producers get a look at that, Jaymelynn?
Just go to our Southeast Research and Extension website, southeast.ksu.edu. Click on Progress Reports, and it'll send you right to these publications.
Again, that's southeast.ksu.edu. Click on the Progress Report link there. And what you're looking for is, by title, the evaluation of warm season annual forages for livestock, biomass, and cost of production. Really instructive information here for producers, as, like you say, Jaymelynn, they have a lot of choices from which to select summer annuals for planting, for grazing, for haying, for silage, for whatever purpose they choose. Thank you for going over this with us right here.
Thank you, Eric.
Jaymelynn Farney with us, a research and extension beef system specialist based in southeast Kansas, and the lead on this summer annual forage research work. We'll return shortly with more here on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. To support the stimulation of individual creativity and visual arts, as well as learning about the preservation of intellectual property as important youth development skills, Kansas 4-H is making changes to its visual arts project area for this year's Kansas State Fair. Youth Development Specialist for Community Vitality, Aliah Mestrovich Seay, says this is a pilot period and will be a time to educate and clarify what Kansas 4-H copyright policies and procedures will be from now on. Aliah, before we talk about the changes, let's take a look at what visual arts are. What all is included in that project area?
We have a lot of different options, whether it's leather or clay or three-dimensional art. We also have just general visual arts that might not fit into other categories.
So when we look at the changes that are being made for the Kansas State Fair, what are some of the impacts and purpose for the changes?
We really want to support the stimulation of individual creativity with different artistic mediums. And we also want youth to begin to learn about the preservation of intellectual property, because that is an important youth development skill to hone in on.
So this is something that will have an impact then on the local units as well?
Yes. First of all, we want people to know that we are currently in a pilot period with these changes to visual arts. And so this year, we are beginning to learn about copyright considerations and also how this is going to be impacting how we display at the state level. However, if these are too many changes to kind of keep in mind for their local fairs, they can simply judge as they always have at the local level this year, and then regroup and look at the Kansas State Fair guidelines for judging and displaying moving forward.
There's probably a lot that goes into the copyright considerations, but what are some of the things that they'll have to focus on in terms of, I guess, first of all, just when approval is necessary?
First of all, I want to set people's minds at ease that youth will not be disqualified for copyright violations, but exhibits may not be permitted to be on public display if there is some type of copyright issue. For example, when the visual art is an original design created by that youth exhibitor, it can be displayed in the public domain. However, if it is made from a kit, and it is purely from a kit, that's not something that really can be displayed publicly because that was not the youth's original idea. If it's a combination of an original design and a kit, it can be displayed publicly if copyright permission was obtained where necessary. Let's say it was adapted from a picture or an internet site and that came from adapted material. That also can be displayed publicly if copyright permission is obtained where necessary. So all of that will be located, kind of the source of the youth's design, on the Kansas State Fair Visual Arts Judging Scorecard, which will be another way to learn more about copyright considerations.
And if they need that permission, how do they go about getting that permission? I guess that's another thing they'll be learning.
Absolutely. Well, there are a variety of ways. One way is to simply write a letter and request permission from the author to be able to display. And so written permission to display exhibitors can then bring that to the judging of exhibits.
I assume that this is not probably just an issue for Kansas 4-H. This is probably an issue for all 4-H?
Yes, I mean, this is something that is being discussed and has been implemented at the national level with many other 4-H programs. And so it is considered a youth development skill to learn about where work comes from and to respect the preservation of intellectual property. You know, we are a land-grant university. We are built on research. And one thing we have to know about research and different project areas is that we have to back up what we do, and we have to be able to explain how we got what we got. And so if that includes other creators and other authors, then it's very important to give them credit. And so I think that actually goes with our land-grant mission, and it's just something that we are honing in on and wanting to deepen as a youth development skill. Now, I will say that it is okay and completely acceptable to draw artistic inspiration from Pinterest or any other internet source. It's just important to emphasize the responsibilities of youth exhibitors to credit the work of others when it influences their project-based work. So, you know, youth can determine what is potentially someone else's work if that's a copyrighted material. If they determine the source, they can ask themselves, well, where did this project idea come from? Who authored it? And then if that is the case, make a request, write a letter to request permission, and upon approval, display it properly with the appropriate source to the author. And this is really no different than when youth are writing in school, and let's say they're writing an essay. They're going to want to credit some of the ideas to people that have thought of those things before they have. When we think about the judging of visual arts, we want youth to be able to demonstrate knowledge and a clear concept of their goal of creating that piece. You know, is that main idea clear? Is the art thought-provoking? Are certain skills mastered? But also, just as importantly, we want them to exhibit and illustrate their own individual creativity through these design elements and principles. You know, is the art intriguing? Are there signs of advanced ability and a unique use of the medium? And then finally, you know, we look at the quality of the technique and the workmanship. How did the youth use the materials, and what were the finishing techniques? Did they take care and ensure the durability of the artifact? So all of these things, knowledge and clear concept, creativity, and quality of technique and workmanship are all things that judges would look for in these visual arts areas. Now, I also want to say that for this year, we're going to relax the quota on visual arts. So it's very possible that of the different categories for the Kansas State Fair, that youth may have submitted work at the local level for one category, let's say general arts, more than another category, like leather, for example. And so if that is the case, that is okay. You know, there could be more submissions for the general arts category if necessary. But what we're hoping to move towards is that there is more balanced representation with different visual arts areas, like being able to submit a 3D art piece or to be able to submit a general art piece in the future. But for this year, we are going to be relaxing the visual arts quota, so there's some flexibility there at the local level, which will hopefully help people learn by doing and kind of learn these new guidelines this year.
That's Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist for Community Vitality, Aliah Mestrovich Seay. To learn more about the Visual Arts Project area, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.